Toinette, I'd like to welcome you here today because I think that you're a lovely person and you'll be wonderful to interview. And I've wanted to do this for a long time. So welcome to New TV.
Thank
you.
And
welcome to our little serendipity show.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Could you tell us a little about your family and growing up? And maybe a little bit, maybe you could start with your grandparents and tell us who your grandparents were and what their life was like.
Well, it's interesting story because my parents migrated from the South to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I didn't grow up around my grandparents. My visits to my grandparents were, I guess, annual trips to Alabama. Most of my time was spent in the rural part of Alabama where my mother grew up in Chilton County, Alabama, where my grandfather had a farm and he grew food, which he ended up, he grew fruit, vegetables, and sold a lot of things. So my memories of my grandparent is very limited. He was the only living parent on my mother's side because my mother's mother passed away when she was 11. And we were always very proud of him because he was very industrious, and when his grandchildren visited from the north, he would tell everybody, "This is my grandchildren from the north. This is my grandchildren from the north." And coming from the north and being in the south, everybody looked at you like you were almost from outer space, but you were always treated very kind and special.
What was his primary job was a farmer? Or did he have other jobs?
He had other, yeah. He was, I guess in a present day sense, we can call him a hustler because he had a truck, so, he would transport things. He had land, so he would grow things, but his job was that he actually worked, I think, in a factory. He had a regular job that he went to. I think I should say 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. But it was something that he was very proud of, and he was able to, I guess, have many children that he took care of. He sent my mother to college, which was something that was unheard of, in the I'll say in the 50s, probably in the late 40s, early 50s. My father grew up out in a city, Montgomery, Alabama. His father passed away when he was young, so he grew up with his mother and his siblings. His mother lived in, I'll say, public housing. You have to think about, I was probably one of the last grandchildren, so I was at the later stage, and she was already in her 80s when I was born, or couldn't interact, as a grandmother would, as I see my son's grandmother interacting with him now, because of course they're much younger and much more involved.
Montgomery, Alabama was really one of the centers of activism in the civil rights movement. Did they have anything to do with the civil rights movement?
Well, again, my father was very much impacted by, what was happening in the city, because he saw how black people were being held back, from being progressive, the segregated housing. The access to employment opportunities was, they were being denied. Educational opportunities, again, segregated, as you said, segregated educational opportunities, which meant, he had people who loved him and who were able to give him a good education, but he knew he couldn't take his education and apply it anywhere because of job opportunities. So when my father graduated high school, he decided to join the Army. And he went into the Army. He served for 4 years. He was actually part of, he served during the Korean, I'll say, conflict. and he was stationed in Greenland. So, you know, just a really series, I think, of odd circumstances. And then after he was, I don't know if the word's released, but after he ended his service, he decided that he wanted to leave Alabama. My father had an older brother who had moved to Pittsburgh. At the time, you know, Birmingham, Alabama had steel mills, but there was also steel mills in the north, in Pittsburgh. So his older brother went to go work in a steel mill and had encouraged my father to come and say, you know, you can come here, get a great job, buy a house, you know, and build your family. So my parents got married, and they moved from Alabama to Coraopolis, Pennsylvania, which is about 15 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Once they arrived in Pittsburgh, my father got a job at the steel mill, worked there briefly because of the working conditions. He just thought they were deplorable. Black people or African Americans were given the worst jobs in the steel mills, and they were paid, of course, less than people who were white or people who were white immigrants coming, you know, be it Polish, Irish. You know, they were paid less, and they were valued less. So my father decided that there wasn't going to, you know, he kind of left the South for lack of opportunity, not to come to the North to face another, you know, lack of opportunity. So he decided to quit, which was probably a very difficult decision because at the time it was the only opportunity that he had. So he started working I will say an odd job in a restaurant, which is bussing dishes. And the restaurant was owned by Italian immigrants, and they really didn't have a lot of, you know, I guess they weren't in the country long enough to have the prejudices that would come later, but they were very kind to my father, and they said, you know, you should, you know, do something with your life, you know, go to college. And because of the GI Bill, my father was able to go to college while he was working at the restaurant. So. And
he did, and so he graduated and got a degree?
Yes, so my father graduated from college. He got a degree. My mother, you know, who had a degree, and she had a teaching degree, and one of the things that she faced was not being able to use her teaching degree. She actually got substitute teaching jobs in the city of Pittsburgh, which were, again, segregated schools. But she faced discrimination there because she had a Southern accent. And a lot of people thought, at least at that time, if you had a Southern accent, you were ignorant, irrespective of whether or not you were educated. And I think some people still think that way today.
So your mother couldn't get a regular job in the Pittsburgh schools?
No, she was never offered a regular position. She was only asked to substitute when teachers didn't show up from time to time for various reasons. So that wasn't, you know, she needed a stable income because they had a growing family. So my mother decided to go work in a factory, and she worked for a plastic company for many years.
And what did she do there?
Making, believe it or not, suitcase handles, you know, like the Samsonite at the time, they had these plastic handles, and she would make things like that. And, you know, for her creative, we had always had funny stories, like she would bring home these like big balls of plastic wax that, you know, I think when they had time down that they would pour different colors on and make different shapes. And of course, you know, she would always, you know, her creative energy, she would say, you know, this is our sculpture. And so that became sort of our art in our house. Was this, you know.
In the meantime, she had children. So how many children did she have?
So I have an older sister and an older brother. And so there's a total of 3 kids in our family.
And what do they do today?
So my sister lives in Virginia, and she works for the government and federal government on an Army base. And my brother lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he works for a sheriff's office in his county.
A sheriff?
He's not a sheriff, but he works for the sheriff's office in his county.
And did the two of them go to college, or?
Yes, my sister was the first one to go to college. She actually went to an historically black college, Lincoln University, which is in Pennsylvania. It's in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. My brother started at a university in Pennsylvania, and I think he went for a year or two, and then he dropped out and went to go work for the airlines for a while, and then he decided to go back to school later.
Oh, okay. Did he get a degree then?
Yes, he actually ended up getting his, finishing his degree, and he just most recently finished his master's degree, right before he turned 60. So,
well, never too late for education.
No, it's never too late. And I'm very proud of him that he was able to finish his degree.
And do you see them often?
Yes, I do. Quite a bit. My brother will come up, because he worked for the airline, he can fly up for a day. When he has time, he comes up for a day and he visits. And same thing for my sister. She comes up from time to time. So we see each other quite often. It was, you know, having siblings when you're younger, you're very close. And then there comes a time, I think, when, you know, you're growing up and you're in high school, you're in college, and you're trying to figure out who you are. You kind of not separate, but there's some distance because you're trying to establish your own identity. And then once you feel comfortable in your own skin, you really feel like, oh my gosh, I miss my family. Got to get back to my roots. Got to get close to the people who really, really love me and who know me. So
are your parents alive, or they are not? They're not alive now.
Both of my parents passed away.
And
yeah.
Okay. And a long time ago, or?
My father passed away in 2001, and my mother passed away in 2014.
Did your mother have a lot of, you know, problems, you know, because your father passed away? Did she have any economic problems or anything once your father passed away?
Well, before my father passed away, you know, the house was paid for and she lived in the home. She was retired, and the community where we lived didn't take much to live. I think my mother, if anything, she tried to do what she thought, well, she wanted to do for her grandchildren what she did for us, which was send everybody to college. So there was this big thing about, you know, everybody has to go to college, irrespective of whether or not you're really college.
If they want to or not.
Not, yeah, are you really ready for college? So I think, you know, she tried to send her grandchildren to college, and, you know, it's sort of like, okay, that Mom said it's not going to work out.
So some didn't want to go. How many grandchildren does she have?
That's a great question. She has 2, 3, 5, 6.
6. And of the 6, Gustav, your son, is one.
Yes.
And he isn't ready. I mean, he's going to college next year, so he doesn't count in this
No.
count. But of the 5, how many actually got to college?
4.
Well, she was
Wait.
successful.
No, I'm sorry. Excuse me, 3.
3. Well,
Yeah,
that's
not
pretty.
4.
That's over half. So she was pretty successful. And Gustav is definitely going to college. So you have 4 out of 6.
Yes.
So, and what are the other 2 doing?
Well, my nephew, who's the oldest, he's in his 40s, and I believe he's an artist. I'll say he is an artist. He likes rapping and singing.
Oh, he's a singing artist.
Singing artist, yes, and he writes songs. And my niece is in her early 20s, and she lives at home with her parents, and I think she takes courses from time to time. So she's taking her time going to college.
Maybe she'll get there.
Yeah.
Like her dad?
Like her dad, like me, like I think everybody, you know, not everybody can do it in 4 years. So.
Yeah, exactly. So then you came along, and what was your childhood like?
My childhood was very, I don't know, I think I had a great childhood. I mean, I grew up in a home, a stable home. We never moved. The home that I went to when I was born and I grew up in, I lived in my whole life. My neighborhood was my neighbors. They knew me from the time that I was born, and they watched me grow up, and I played with their children, I played with their grandchildren. So I had a great time. I mean, I think about my early life. My mother says one of the things that happened to me early in my life, which she thinks was one of the best things, was that there was Head Start program, and they were offering it in our area. And the woman begged my mom to let me go to Head Start. And my mom says, I don't know what that is, but okay, she can go. Because my mom's thinking, that's daycare, that I don't have to pay for or arrange. She can be at Head Start, for a couple hours, at least while I'm at work. Being in kindergarten, of course, was making sure that my hands were washed and clean before I could touch a book. And, that gave me a lot of respect for books. Like, books were something that you didn't touch with dirty hands.
So you enjoyed that Head Start program. You found it very valuable.
Oh, yes. When I was young, I really enjoyed school. I had a lot of great experiences, and I think that I have to attribute to, I'll say, the educators that I interacted with. These were people who really wanted to be teachers, who really loved children, who really loved, teaching. And I think they were really great at it. And I don't know if it had to do with the time frame where teachers actually lived in the same community where they taught. Classes were relatively small. There were always less than 20 kids in a room. I mean, I can't imagine. Now I see classrooms that are much larger than that. So I had a lot of great things happening around school and education and teaching. And those were the people who, in my early life, outside of my parents and my family and our community, that impacted me the most.
And so then you went off to primary school. And what was that like?
Learning to be in the library, it became one of my favorite places, probably because it was quiet, but again, because it had the books where you could sit and read and just be. You could be in the library, but with a book, you could be transformed anywhere. So I just really enjoyed the library.
You sound like an ideal student. I wish I had had more students like that.
Well, I guess, again, it goes to the people. I had some, early on, I think I may have had some attention issues. I don't know. But there was this one teacher who was over the gifted, we called it GATE, Gifted and Talented Enrichment Program. And I didn't test very high to be gifted and talented. But the woman said, I could use the extra work, and she wanted to expose me to the other kids, so I was sort of an honorary member of the Gifted and Talented Enrichment Group. And I think, again, because I was somebody as a kid, like you say, an ideal student, somebody who was quiet, somebody who liked reading, somebody who listened, and just really enjoyed being in school.
That teacher was very smart, a very good teacher.
Yeah,
to bring you into that group.
Yes. Every time I see a reminder of it, and I think she may or may not remember it, but I say thank you. I always say thank you so much. You saved my life.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sure she did contribute very much to your life.
Yes.
So, was she one of the people who influenced you most in your childhood? And are there others that have influenced you most in your childhood?
Well, there was, of course, other folks, such as there was a reverend, or I don't even know if he was a reverend, but he was involved with the church, him and his wife, and they had Vacation Bible School. So, again, my mom was always very creative about child care, and she would find programs for us to participate in so that it would take up time so she wouldn't, worry, okay. So, of course, I always went to Vacation Bible School. And so, again, wonderful people who taught about, how do you care for other people, how do you respect other people. And so I was always surrounded by, I'll say, a diverse group of people who always treated me with respect and care. The only, as I got older, of course, the world gets bigger and it gets tougher and of course, meaner. And so I will say, as I get older, my bubble did burst in terms of what was life like.
Did you have an incident in which you suddenly woke up that everybody isn't that nice?
Oh, yes. So I had a neighbor across the street. Her name was Mrs. Crease. And she had an older son who had children who were closer to my age. And he had married and I believe divorced and then remarried to a woman who was not so nice. So he was a pilot, and so I guess, now you're talking about in the 70s? Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. That, he was a pilot and they lived in a very nice neighborhood. They didn't live in our neighborhood. They lived in a very nice neighborhood outside of Pittsburgh. And so Robin was turning 16. And so
she was in your class?
No, she was not in my class. She visited her grandmother.
Oh, her grandmother lived in your
neighborhood. And so when she visited her grandmother lived across the street.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
so she would come and play. So her grandmother was like, I was good friends with her grandmother. So I was good friends with Robin. So when Robin turned 16, she was going to have a big party at her house and then have a sleepover. So Robin and her older brother drove down. They drove to, Coriopolis to pick me up and to take me back to the house for the party. When her stepmother saw that I was black, she almost fainted because there was no way that a black person was going to stay in her house. So here I was I think I was 15, and I had my little, bag to stay over. And I was told that I wasn't able to stay at their house because I was black.
They even said that?
Yes.
They told that explicit?
That explicit because Robin, you can imagine, Robin was like screaming, because this was her stepmother, this wasn't her mother. Mm-hmm. She was screaming, like, what's wrong with you? So it became an altercation. So, of course, when people are screaming and yelling at each other, they say what's on their mind.
Oh, yeah.
There's no holding back. And so at that point, Robin said, fine, we'll have the sleepover at Grandma's house. So Robin, and her brother jumped in the car. So she left her upper-class neighborhood with all the rich girls at the stepmom's house, because that's what we called it, stepmom's house. And they came back to our town and we hung out and we celebrated her birthday.
That story is a very good story. It's about loyalty of kids. And, it was her stepmother, but she probably had a lot of other problems with her stepmother, I'm sure. But she was much more loyal to you and just said, forget this party, I'm going to Grandma's house. I like that story a lot.
I wasn't in the house 5 minutes. I think it was literally the woman fainted because she had no idea. Because you remember, I could call the house, I could talk to Robin, but she had never seen me. And she didn't like her mother-in-law because she didn't really come down to visit her mother-in-law that often. Yeah. So she didn't really have a good sense of what was going on when Robin was visiting her grandmother.
So, so did that really influence you, that event? Did that influence you a lot and make you think differently?
Well, it made me think differently about race. I mean, because up until that time, I lived in this very protected environment where everyone that I met was very accepting. And I say that from the perspective of, as early as 4 years old, I remember my mother and I getting on a train, and that's when my grandfather died, when I was 4. And we were traveling down to Alabama, and we were on this train, and I remember these men, who were playing cards and drinking and having a good time, and inviting my mom and I to come hang out with them. And so, I mean, these were strangers, and my mom was very trusting. These were white men, do you know what I mean? And so my mom was okay with it, because we were in a train, and they were very nice. They gave me Coke and peanuts, and have a good time, and look out the window and enjoy yourself. To the point where, the community where I was, in the Head Start program, I did dancing school, there was the YMCA, there was always people in our community, no matter who they were. I mean, the Italian American community that, embraced us as we were Italian Americans, even though we were a little darker than they were. I mean, so we just had this sense that the world was this very accepting and great place, and all of a sudden, I found out that not everybody was like that.
Did you become more suspicious after that?
Probably not. And I say that from the perspective of I had all these positive experiences. I had way too many positive experiences to let that one. It impacted me, yes, and it still affected me. But I knew it was the person. Do you know, that one person? Yeah. And I couldn't extrapolate that to say it was like all white people. Yeah. So you can imagine now, you can imagine I had this sense of being a black woman and then being exposed to black people who had a completely different experience, who would say they didn't like white people, or they wouldn't, there was always this, they say, why are all the black kids sitting together at the cafeteria table? That didn't happen at our school. Mm-hmm. We kind of intermixed and mingled. And I couldn't understand that, the whole separation or segregation of people. I really had a hard time with it because I had seen it work in a community that was quite diverse, socially and economically.